So this is about autism and the Black community. I will be using the word white a lot, and I know that a lot of people within the white community aren't used to being labelled, so they start to feel very uncomfortable when they hear the word white. But you have to appreciate that me as a Black individual, when I'm being described, I'm being described as BAME or Black. You know, it's always part of my description. And the white community never have to be described as anything other than their kind of name. So I'm going to be using the word white in this a lot, and it will make some people feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. Just own your uncomfortable feeling, and maybe later on, question yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable? So I'm just kind of making you guys aware of that. And I won't be making a lot of eye contact because autistic people don't make a lot of eye contact, and it's incredibly painful for me to look at people's eyes, and even via Zoom, it's really difficult for me to still look at people. So my eyes will be darting around everywhere. I don't know what it's called, but it's who I am, and it's something a lot of us kind of talk about as autistic individuals. Right, so I mean, Megan did a really good job of explaining this slide really well, so I don't have to go into it. The only thing I will say is I started MisTÂûght because a little boy in my daughter's class, when she was 6 years old, because that's when she received her diagnosis, a little boy kept saying that autism was a disease, and she was really upset by it. And I was getting really angry about it, and the school didn't handle it very well. And I know just how receptive kids can be. They're like little sponges absorbing information. And I thought, actually, if I create something where I can go and educate children about autism, then hopefully, in theory, as they get older, it'll be a more inclusive and accepting society. So that's why I initially started MisTÂûght. So like everything else, whenever we start a charity or an organisation, a lot of us start it for selfish reasons, but actually our selfish reasons can help other people as well. So I'm going to try and be like really honest here, which feels uncomfortable, but it is what it is. So I'm Black British, and I'm really proud of my heritage. You know, I have my family are Jamaican, so, you know, I'll have rice and peas for dinner on a Sunday, but I'm also a Yorkshire lass, so I'll have a Yorkshire pudding on my plate as well. So for me, in that regards, I've kind of got the best of both worlds. So I'm really, really proud of who I am. I'm a mum of two, and I absolutely love and adore my children. And so, you know, sometimes when they talk about the refrigerator mum and like this coldness that we're supposed to have as autistic people and not have empathy and compassion, it's absolute BS. I love my children passionately, and my household is just full of love and laughter, and we have the sickest jokes, and some of them are probably not appropriate, but as a household we are constantly laughing at each other, laughing at other people, laughing at the world. We laugh all the time. So to me, autistic people have a fantastic sense of humour as well. My passion is Marvel Cinematic Universe, Game of Thrones, things like that. And I loved Game of Thrones so much, I actually started a reaction channel on YouTube where I took my sister through Game of Thrones because she'd never seen it. And we would sit and we would dissect the episodes for like an hour afterwards. And I was totally immersed in it. So that was like my hyper-focus thing at that minute in time. And I learned to edit videos and upload videos. And I had like a really successful YouTube channel because I absolutely love, I love those programs. So that's my kind of passion. And it's something I never get the opportunity to talk about. And especially during lockdown, where we're all kind of stuck in our house, I've got nobody in my house who's as passionate about it as me. So it's really, really difficult. I'm a compulsive overeater, and that's one of the things that I do to cope with an environment that is hard for me as an autistic person to cope in. So I will compulsively overeat to cope with stress, to cope with anxiety, but I also compulsively overeat when I'm feeling really happy. So there's not a rhyme or reason to it, but that is something that is a part of me. And so I attend something called Overeaters Anonymous, which has helped me more than any diet program or anything like that I've been a part of, because it helps me to it helps me to look deeper at why I'm overeating. So it's not a diet or anything like that, but it's something where it helps me to kind of unpick the things that I'm struggling with. But definitely kind of because I got a late diagnosis, my coping mechanisms for coping with this world are very flawed. And so like I will totally immerse myself in Marvel movies during isolation because actually I felt safe in that environment. I will compulsively overeat when my kids aren't coping very well because actually, you know, food feels warm and familiar. So my ways of coping with the world aren't helpful to me, but it's what I do. I was diagnosed with severe prolonged depression at 18. Again, I didn't know I was autistic. So I was trying to function in a neurotypical world as a Black woman, not understanding what's going on and having to act a certain way, but internally I didn't feel like anybody around me. So I would be in a room full of people and feel completely alone. And this was people I knew. And so I was incredibly depressed and I really struggled and continue to struggle with depression. I had raindrop psoriasis at 19 because of the place where I was working. It was inside. There was a lot of fluorescent lighting. It was a shop in Meadowhall, a very big, well-known shop, and there was no natural sunlight. And you know, if you think about the lights and the tills, even the sounds on the floor, because there wasn't any carpet, and I had to cope with that for like 8 and 9 hours a day. And my body was just shutting down and I didn't understand it because I didn't know I was autistic. So I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome after an incredibly stressful time again in my work environment. And I would come home from work being a civil servant and I would crawl up the stairs. It was absolutely horrible. But again, I didn't know I was autistic. And this is one of the problems with when you mask, because I've learned to pretend and cope with an environment that I'm in until it gets too much. And then I become really, really ill and can't function. Now I've got my diagnosis of autism. I think I did regress a little bit initially, but I'm becoming a lot more aware of myself. I know what does and doesn't work for me. There are things that I will no longer stand for. I may stand for it like for a little moment in time, but I won't stand for it as much now. And a lot of that came from me doing the master's degree in autism studies, and I'm still to complete my dissertation. And I know my lecturer's on this, so I know I've got to complete the dissertation, but lockdown got in the way and the kids had to be my priority. So hopefully I will finish this by the summer and then I can officially say I've got a master's in it. But going to that class, learning about myself, being more confident as a mum has helped me so much. And I went there for me. I didn't go there for anybody else. I went there to figure myself out because I consider myself to have a late diagnosis, although I know people now in their 70s who have received diagnosis. And, you know, to live for 70 years and not know why you're struggling, why things are so confusing, why things don't make sense. I have so much empathy because I know how much my body has been physically and emotionally battered trying to cope in a society where, this society has been created for neurotypical people. It hasn't been created for a person like me in mind. So every talk I do, I always put this in. And this is from the Office of National Statistics, and this is how we are labelled. So as you can see, you have, if you're English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, Gypsy or Irish traveller, or any other white background, you're classed as white. And then everything else is classed as BAME. And so when you think about conferences and talks on autism, and you roll up to go and hear somebody talk, there's never anybody who looks like me at the conference talking. So I always have to sit and hear about autism from the white perspective, or from people who have written books, or lecturers or professionals in the autism community, and they are always white. And very, very rarely you will have a BAME doctor, what they call BAME. And I always say, when I give a talk, I could only talk about my experience, but I can't be a tick box exercise for people who are asking me to talk. People can't say, well, we've got Melissa to talk and she's from the BAME community, so we've got a BAME rep, because I cannot tell you what it feels like for a Japanese autistic person. It's physically impossible for me to tell you, because culturally there are differences. There are things that are and aren't acceptable in that culture. Equally for the Arab community, I can't tell you what that feels like. I can't even really tell you what it feels like from an African perspective, because culturally, the Jamaican community have a lot of differences with the African community, because Africa is a continent. So I can come here and tell you what it feels like for me as a, I was going to say 30, not even anymore, 40-plus-year-old Black woman whose parents originated from Jamaica. I can tell you what that feels like. I have a lot of insight into what it feels like for an Asian person, or a Muslim person, or an Arab person. And the perspective I can give you is because we're not white. So that we have a shared experience of racism, but it will look different. We have a shared experience of prejudice, but it will look different. So when I need people to understand how, well, not people, I need white individuals to understand how offensive it is when they say, well, we've got a BAME rep, because it's not acceptable in today's society for a BAME rep for you to feel a BAME rep is going to be able to represent anything. It's impossible. And so as organisers, people organising things, you need to do better. And whenever I give talks, there is a lot of me telling people off. I try to do it respectfully, but to be honest, I'm not trying to do it respectfully. You need to do better. Organisations have all this money and all this power, and you have conferences and things every year, and there's nobody who looks like me, ever. Occasionally there's a doctor. That's not the lived experience. And you can't just call them BAME, because what does BAME actually mean? And this quote, I always love this quote, because, this woman's rightfully saying, personally, I have never referred to my ethnicity using BAME or BME, and I don't like it when they're used to describe me. Like many ethnic minorities, I proudly refer to my specific ethnic identity. My background is Indian. And so for me, my background is Black, I'm Black British, and my background is Jamaican. But I was born and bred here. I'm a Yorkshire lass, born in Sheffield in 1979. I can remember when the bus fares were 2p for kids and 5p for adults, because I'm that old. But I can tell you that experience. I can't tell you what it's like to be Chinese and autistic. So white privilege is something that people need to understand a bit better, and there's a refusal on a lot of people to accept that as a white individual you have privilege, because you see yourself as, well, I don't have any money either, I wasn't able to go to university, but that's not what white privilege is about. So Peggy McIntosh, not sure the year she did it, but she actually coined white privilege, and her explanation is really good. So she's saying, as a white person, I realised I'd been taught about racism as something that puts others at disadvantage, but had been taught not to see one of its corollary, God, I can't say the word, aspects, white privilege, which with me at an advantage. I think whites are carefully taught not to recognise white privilege, as males are taught not to recognise male privilege. So I have begun in an untutored way to ask what it is like to have white privilege. I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions: maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. And I think up until maybe, a couple of weeks ago, people would not have there wouldn't be a good example for me to use of white privilege. Well, there always is, but people won't accept it. But I can now say, well, what happened to that white woman in London walking home was atrocious. And you saw men blindly step in and say, well, not all men are like that. And you had these women arguing and saying, you don't understand the privilege you have as a man to be able to walk on the streets and not have to worry about being whistled at, or, you know, not have to kind of hold your bag a bit tighter. And so men have got these privileges that they're not aware of. They just get on with their day-to-day life. Well, I'm here to explain to you that there's white privilege as well. And as a white individual, you're able to live with a certain security that me as a Black person can't. And that's also for the autistic community. Within the autism community, there's still white privilege. And some people don't understand that and think we're all in this together. But the autism community is just a smaller version of the wider community. And so there is still white privilege within the autism community. So, you know, you're more likely to get a diagnosis. You're more likely to not be misdiagnosed. You're more likely to not be institutionalized as a white autistic person. That is more likely to happen with someone from the BAME community. So even though you are marginalized as an autistic individual, I need you to appreciate that Black autistic people are further marginalized because of the intersectionalities that we face. So I think a lot of you will know about the social model of disability, and basically what that's saying is I'm disabled because of the way society is made up. So if society was created equally in a way where if I, for instance, was in a wheelchair and the building had no lifts or elevators, whatever you want to call it, then actually I'm less disabled because I don't have to worry about the lift breaking down and me not being able to come down the stairs. You know, the doors are wide enough, there's no fluorescent lighting. So if society and buildings and organisations were made better with disabled people in mind, then us as disabled people are less disabled. So I follow the social model of disability. I also believe in critical race theory, and that believes that race is not biological or natural. It is socially created concept by the majority white population to maintain an advantage over minorities. So what we're saying is society, if you think about the NHS, if you think about local councils, if you think about organisations as a whole, they're actually, the structure of them are very white. So that is classed as, for critical race theory, we're saying it's made up with racial oppression in mind. We are disadvantaged because we are Black. That's what that's saying. I hope that made sense. Again, I always show this one. I show pictures of the faces and the main names in the autism community. These are the scholars, these are the people who coined words like autism and refrigerator mom and Asperger's, and you know, these are the people, these people here. And you know, the UK and EU laws and policies are biased against Black people, much like the criteria and diagnostic tools for autism, which was developed by white affluent doctors on a cohort of white middle-class patients. And like that first group of patients were white middle-class boys. I think the majority of them was boys. I think there's only one girl I've read about. But, you know, you had to have the money to kind of seek help for your child at the turn of the century. And it was white boys, white middle-class boys. And so autism was created believing that it was something that happened to boys. And it took a long time for people to acknowledge and realize that girls can be autistic as well. So with the critical race focused, it demonstrates ways in which the legal institutions support that bias and has since been used to critique all institutions where Black people are present, including educational organisations. So for me, this is what I believe. I believe that critical race theory brings a richness of explanation to the experience of the Black autistic person. And so although I do believe in Western theories of autism, I do always think about it with critical race as well. So, you know, they say, well, this is the definition of autism, but I do always remember, oh, right, but it started with a group of white boys in mind, affluent white boys. And so even now when the diagnostic criteria change, you know, the cohort of people who they're looking at is still primarily white, which means the Black community, the Asian community, the Chinese community. Autistic individuals within those communities are still being missed because of the diagnostic tools that we use. And so it also helps to reaffirm the experiences shared of the wider BME communities, feeling voiceless before intersections of disability are added. So for me, you know, as a woman, a lot of us would argue that as women, you know, we're disadvantaged. And then also as a Black woman, that's further marginalisation. And then also I have a disability. And it's not a physical disability, it's not something you can see, it's an invisible disability. And so it's hard to get people to acknowledge I'm disabled. And I often feel heartbroken in interactions with people when they tell me that I'm articulate or high functioning. And that's why I was really honest with you on that first slide where I was telling you about all my different diagnoses and my eating disorder, because actually I'm trying to show you and convey that my life is one big mess. I just hide it well because as a Black individual, I have to keep myself safe. And so it feels like I'm disadvantaged for trying to look after myself, and that's not how it should be. And I shouldn't be made to feel like I'm not autistic enough or disabled enough to be a representative within the community. So I've made this picture myself, and I sat there today making the picture instead of checking for my spelling in this presentation or, you know, going through it, checking times. I just focused on this because I become focused on something and I can't look at anything else. And there's lots of pictures banded around where they, you know, it's that the person and they're trying to watch a baseball game behind a fence. And I like it, but I don't know, I have to kind of try and do it in a way that makes better sense for me. And so this is the Black autistic when you're looking at it through critical race theory eyes. And so you have the white autistic man. And obviously for a very long time, for decades, we believed only men could be autistic. And we also live in a society where men kind of progress better in work, in education. You know, they say it's a man's world. So if you think about the male autistic individual at a conference or as an author, that's kind of what you saw a lot of for until the last, I'd say, 10 years. And then all of a sudden, white female autistics started to say, well, what about me? I'm autistic. I have a voice. I demand to be heard as well. Because, you know, what about equality? We deserve to be seen and heard as well, which I totally agree with. And so they were like, oh, okay, then, yeah, you're right. Let's try and do better. Let's try and get some white autistic females into this as well, you know, into the not secret society, but almost like a seat at the table. I like to use that. White autistic women started to get a seat at the table as well. And then they kind of just closed the doors and ticked the box and said, well, you know, we've got men and women, both male and female autistics. Yeah, we've got full representation now. And then, so just like in the Office of National Statistics, where you've got white and everything else, the same thing happened here, where we had a lot of focus on them and nothing else existed. And so then you have Black autistics, Asian autistics, and some of us are very educated. Some of us can represent and be of value to organisations, to conferences, to education. You know, they can be writing books, but there's no opportunities to do that. And so I used apples because I thought, you know, let's use apples and the ladders to kind of show you the reality of it through my eyes. You have the white man who, when you look at equality, we all believe equality should be like a level playing field. So all the blue or purple apples, they're all at one level because that's equality. But actually, if the white man's got this massive ladder and the Black people have got this short ladder, we're still not reaching anything. And then you've got equity, where it's like, okay, let's even the playing fields a bit better. Yeah, that's fantastic, but it actually isn't, because the Black person still can't get the other fruit. And then there's the reality. And the reality is that it's pretty grim for anybody who isn't white. And there's a comedian called Dave Chappelle, and some people think he's quite controversial, but I like him. And one of the things he said is, he says within the trans community and within the gay communities and things, he says that those communities are furthered because there are white men in it. And he's basically saying that any injustice that can affect a white male and also a white female, any injustices that can affect them, movement happens, you know, changes are made. But if it's just as affecting the other, the BAME community, very little's done. And we've had a prime example again. Last year, we had the Black Lives Matter marches, and whether you're against marching during COVID or not, Black people were out there marching for police reform. And, you know, they were vilified. You know, people were really, really angry about it. But then last week we've had protests where, you know, you saw white women being assaulted by police, and all of a sudden everybody's saying we need police reform. And it was really hard for Black individuals to watch that, because we were saying, well, that's what do you think we've been fighting for all this time? You know, this has been happening to us, and you won't believe us or listen to us until it happens to you or somebody who looks like you. So again, it's a prime example of it's evidence of us. There's an understanding as to why we feel like we don't matter within the community, so within the wider community and also within the autism community, because we're never given a voice. And by voice, I don't mean like the verbal voice. I mean, we're not given the space to be able to communicate in a way that works for us. We're not able to communicate our lived experiences. Nobody cares about our lived experiences. Nobody's willing to pay us to learn about our lived experiences. And what's happening with like police reform, what's happening with when they're talking about male privilege, that is things that we've been telling you about from a Black perspective for so long. And it feels like nobody cared until it happened to people who look like you. So Black autistics and critical race. So Carl Cameron sees the autism movement as a civil rights act of resistance. And he stated that we mask to keep ourselves safe and to make non-autistic people feel comfortable. So stop making them feel comfortable and show them what it is to be autistic. Literally flap it in their faces and be proud. And there is a massive movement of taking off the mask. And lots of autistic people mask to just cope. And autistic women in particular, we tend to be more sociable. And for me personally, I learned through observation. So I learned what the best things to wear are through seeing what other people are wearing. And it's something I've done for years. So even when someone walks in a room, very quickly I've scanned what they're wearing. And I'm not doing it for superficial reasons. I'm doing it to kind of understand what's acceptable in 2021, because fashion is it's ever evolving, and I've never got a clue what to wear. And I would happily just wear hoodies and lounge pants for the rest of my life. But that's not socially acceptable. And so I'm always scanning people for their hairstyles and for the clothes they've got on and the shoes they're wearing to see what is acceptable now. And so when we're talking about masking, for me as a Black person, and when we look at it through a critical race eyes, you know, I can say that this statement is like dripping with privilege. This person saying, take the mask off and be exactly who you are. Actually, as a Black individual, we can't do that because we have to keep that mask on to keep ourselves safe. So this is a tweet from last year. This was before lockdown started. And this woman put it up on Twitter, and she's saying, can anyone help? My son has been threatened with tasers by the police twice this week and searched. He's autistic, and I wondered if there's a card he can carry with him so police don't end up hurting him. And there was lots of responses that came up to say, well, if he's not got anything to hide, just talk to the police. And the police are just doing their job. And there was lots of comments from white people where they were like blaming this. He's a child, and for like he was just riding his bicycle, and I think he had a sandwich in his hand, and the police had threatened him again. And some people were saying, yeah, just carry a card to say who you are. But white people don't understand it's not safe for you to reach in your pocket when police are questioning you. Or, you know, if some people were saying, well, wear a lanyard around you. And it's like, well, no, because then everybody knows you're vulnerable. And you know, that's unfair. This is a teenager who's wanting to be more independent, and he can't because he's a Black teenager. And I always talk about my son, and I mean, he's absolutely gorgeous. And there's people on here who know him, and he's the most nonchalant, laid back child you'll ever know. But he's getting really, really tall now. He's in like size 10 shoes. He's getting really tall, and he's going to be broad. And when he can't cope with something, he just runs. So if a police officer was to ask him something and he wouldn't know how to answer, he'd just run. So that's not safe for my son, because straight away they would think he's hiding something. He can sometimes have outbursts. And, you know, a lot of times when a vulnerable person is having an outburst, the first thing a police officer is going to think is, maybe this person has additional needs. What can we do to support them? That thought doesn't come to mind when it's a Black child, especially a Black boy. So even during lockdown with COVID, where white autistic people were kind of demanding the right to be able to go out more for their own mental health, us as a Black autistic family, we stayed home and we stayed in our garden, because I couldn't put my children in a position where a white person is going to stop them and question them. And it wouldn't just be a white police officer. Within the white community, there's this feeling like you have a right to question us or to know what we're doing. And so in order for me to keep my children safe, we didn't use the exemption that we had where we could go out more often because we're autistic. We stayed at home, not because we were saving the NHS, but because I wanted to save my children's mental health and physical health from harm of the wider community. So for me as a Black autistic person, I mask my Blackness in white spaces. So white spaces are any environment that has been created by statutory services, because they are white spaces. And then I mask in autism spaces because predominantly they're white spaces as well. And last year with the Black Lives Matter things, even us as Black autistic people, because we would go on Facebook or Twitter to groups that we felt safe in, and we'd want to talk about the trauma that we were suffering at seeing things like what was happening to George Floyd and what was happening in protests. And we'd want to talk about it, and we'd have white autistic people saying, well, we're all equal. And we'd be saying, no, but as a Black person, we're suffering right now. And they say, well, we're all autistic here, we're all equal, we all suffer, we're all marginalised. And there was a disconnect and an unwillingness to try to understand that even though as an autistic person you're marginalised, as a Black autistic person, we were really, really suffering, and we couldn't find any safe spaces other than we created our own little groups of Black autistic people and BAME autistic people on social media where we could talk to one another, to talk about everything we were struggling with. Because not only were we having to see those things on telly and hear the reports and hear people's opinion on social media, but we were then also having to hear that from white autistic people who we thought were our friends. You know, we felt equal to you until then, and then it was like, well, actually no, because there's an unwillingness for you to understand that we've got this real pain that doesn't include you. And it was really hard. And then we were also getting white individuals private messaging us to say, gosh, what's happening is awful. Can you tell us what books we should read? And it's like, oh my God, I'm traumatized right now. And you also want me to educate you at the same time. And I can't do that. Thank you, Megan. And so we just felt like everything was caving in on us. And I am talking on behalf of the Black community right now. We felt absolutely suffocated, is the word. We felt suffocated at what was going on and the lack of support that we were receiving from our peers, because the support was coming in private messages where you were asking advice on what to read and what to research. And right then we didn't need that from any of you. This is something I'm still playing with, and I'm still trying to explain it properly. But one of the people one of my lecturers always talks about the autistic person and the environment you're in determines the outcome. But actually, in all these theories that I see, even in the like the double empathy theories, race is never part of the theories. And while I appreciate that as a white individual, you're not going to think of race being important parts of these theories, but people do need to understand that. And actually, Black and brown and people from other ethnicities, we need the space and we need the funding and we need the opportunity to write about this and to create these theories that can hopefully be adopted. So it's not something that a white person can look at and say, oh yeah, let's run with this. No, because you don't have that lived experience. Give us the funding, give us the support to build upon it. Don't plagiarize it. Don't take it from us and like recreate it and make it your own. Give us the space to do it. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about double consciousness, and double consciousness is a lot like what I was talking about, where, you know, you have to be two people, you have to act like two people. So for me, in a Black environment, I'm a lot more at ease. I can relax my accent, I can go into patois, I can be louder, I can be more animated without people thinking I'm aggressive. A few Christmases ago, I observed my family talking on Christmas Day, and there was like 10 of us, and they were so loud, and they're banging their hand on the table, and they're laughing, and they're talking, and their hands are moving. And I was watching them, and to me, it just looked like love and warmth and community. But so I couldn't understand how to somebody else they would look at that and see that as being aggressive or flinching, thinking, oh, they're going to hurt me, they're going to hit me. I am a naturally animated, big person who laughs and loves and moves my hands a lot. But when I'm in a white space, you know, I lower my voice, I put my hands down, because I can't appear to be aggressive or the angry Black woman. And so he talks about this double consciousness and this veil. And so as a Black autistic person, for me, it's triple, because actually within the Black community, I can be more at ease and more animated, but then I can't be my true inner self, because my true inner self's autistic. And so there are isms to me that they won't understand, because culturally my isms wouldn't be acceptable. And so I have to mask who I am as well amongst my people. And so a lot of the time there's a loneliness to me that very little can fill. And Marvel Universe fills it a lot, but actually it doesn't. And so I still continue to search for my community where I can be completely myself. This one is just, this was just some examples of the difference between white privilege and you being an ally, and this for the white people. And part of you being an ally is acknowledging that you're privileged. You know, as a white person, you're privileged, and it's about acknowledging that privilege is nothing to do with money. And so, you know, acknowledging that the tools are flawed and helping to lobby for less biased tools, acknowledging that the theories and the theorists are all white, and then so you training and supporting Black people and brown people to move into those areas of work. You know, even the books that you're reading, they're all white, the journals are all white. Well, then look further afield, seek out BAME authors and BAME poetry about disability. So you're starting to learn about intersectionality. it doesn't take a lot of work for you to get on this path of being an ally. And a lot of it is just laziness and an unwillingness to accept the privilege that you have. So in conclusion, my knowledge as a Black person growing up, God, I can't see the, right, sorry. You know, when you've got the thing on the page, it's hard to see the words at the corner. So yeah, growing up in a Western society has countless experiences of white fragility. When one tries to have an honest dialogue about race, naively, I thought the autism community would be more sympathetic to intersections of Black disabled people. Unfortunately, I'm witnessing the same hierarchical pecking order of white voices, intrinsically unable to relinquish power for the bigger cause. And so I'm always talking about, as a Black person, I deserve a seat at the table. But actually what I've started to do is make a decision. I don't want to be at the table. I'm going to have to create my own table where there's people around it who are more representative. And that includes white people as well, but in a more realistic, honest way, where we are learning and working with one another instead of, you know, white people being up here and Black people being inferior in the pecking order. And then the last slide is just, you know, I always remind people that autistic people don't like puzzle pieces. It's really offensive because you're saying something's missing and something's missing in us, and, you know, we're a puzzle that needs to be put together. We don't like Autism Speaks. I've not grown up in America. The adult autistic people that I speak to who have been taught ABA talk, you know, it sounds absolutely horrific, being forced to almost be something you're not. The thought of me or my kids being forced to make eye contact, it's such a painful thing. And so I'm fully opposed to, and I'm against Autism Speaks. And so I don't like Light Up Blue because that's from Autism Speaks. And they've also got a puzzle piece. So it's a double no-no. Autistic people prefer the infinity symbol. And you can see two of those at the bottom. And we use stuff like hashtags like actually autistic, autistic trans pride, Black autistics as well. That's another hashtag. And although I understand taking off the mask, I've also told you that you need to appreciate, as a Black community, taking off the mask in a white society can be really, really difficult for us. So that's my talk. I hope I didn't ramble too much, and I hope I kept time, because I have not been gifted with the ability to keep to time or have a good email box where I read messages. So over to you, Megan.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. That's absolutely wonderful talk. So many important messages going across so many different topics. And I just wanted to mention lots of comments in the chat, really agreeing with lots of the statements that you're making, and thanking you for presenting and speaking to everyone today, and helping, you know, the people on the call just to sort of educate ourselves just a little bit more in that area. Really wonderful. I'm just going to stop the recording just now.